Suddenly, a familiar feeling, that irresistible pull channeled through his packed weaponry. Moments later, he found himself in a small, dimly lit cavern. There, in the middle, he immediately recognized an old enemy, the creature of pure evil, waiting for revenge. Pit Fiend.
I finally bought the contract off of your puny patron, Clunker. It's time to get a return on my investment,
slowly uttered the menacing-looking devil.
Oh, is that so? Well, come and get me then.
Foil issued a challenge after fear invaded his mind, but only for a moment. He quickly shrouded himself with the first layer of protective magic. The mighty fiend spread its wings and flew right at the armored combatant. Its maw, claw, and mace descended upon him, immediately followed by a cracking tail whip.
Ooh, almost got me there. Try harder next time,
said Foil as he magically shielded himself from a hellish smack.
Need some help clearing your mind?
He continued, taunting the devil, right after unleashing an explosion of psychic energy at it, clearly making the fiend even less deliberate in its violence and aggression.
Burn, puny clunkerhead.
Devil pointed back at Foil, a fiery energy momentarily flashing from its finger.
Oh wow, you didn't even read the fine print?
Foil started openly mocking after countering the flying fiend's spell with a quick but elegant motion of his longsword.
What kind of a sloppy devil's work is that?
He added as he cast another spell and magically vanished.
Where are you?
The pit fiend was bewildered and trying to make sense out of the situation.
Over here!
Foil sounded off from the side, followed by two quick, divinely infused cuts by his longsword. Then he vanished again.
What? Again?
The pit fiend looked completely befuddled at this point. Two more swings from another side cut deep into its ribcage, surging with divine power.
Look, let's be real. It will take me a while to kill you, and you don't want to die, right?
Suggested Foil, just before blinking out of existence again.
Fine,
agreed the pit fiend, realizing the horrible futility of all his offensive efforts.
Attaboy,
popped Foil back in, magically paralyzing the pit fiend in the process.
You know, I could still kill you, but both you and me know you have some connections in the Nine Hells, so let's talk instead.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the Devil General's grand scheme got completely foiled. Full pun intended in this case. Everybody, welcome to the new video. It's been a while. It's been a couple of days. I've been battling with some, issues. I've been away from home, so I had some technical difficulties. But, yeah, I'm finally able to record a video in my natural habitat, in my little room, in my cave back at home. So, yeah, MinMax Munchkin back with another video, definitely, and this is gonna be just the first of many. Before I begin talking about this build, the mandatory, always dear to my heart, shout out to all my patrons. So Mike, Matthew, Ewing, Larry, Hocken, BardlyManHardlyTrying, Rogor, Jared, Henderson, Kaleron, SuburbanHell, Frank Fan, Albert Kwak, Aidan Harth, Darth Xín, Gary Course, Brad Oldham, C Alcazar, Bredwin, your boy Fox, Bryan Moten, Sean, guise, Mannozzi Stefano, Adekoya, Zeb McCubbin, Nathan James, PrimalBassBoost, bittenbi, Shykes, Trevor Green, Gaston, Ramirez, Jordan Smith, Bassett, Lloyd, and Lord Gazda. Thank you for your continued support, all new and old patrons. And obviously at this point, if you like the intro story, like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button, you know the drill. It's probably not your first video, and if you ever decide to chuck a buck my way, there's an option always on my Patreon page. So I invite you to check that out if you're interested. It's not mandatory, but it's always welcome. So the link is gonna be in the description down below. Anyway, let's jump into the build. Let's not waste any more time. So, what is Untouchable? So my basic idea behind this build was to make it focus on inflating armor class to be harder to hit. Not the biggest armor class, but definitely very, very high on average. Buff its own saving throws to avoid debilitating conditions, damage, and you know, all the other effects that go off of failed saving throws. All the while debuffing enemies' attack rolls and saving throws, meaning that you know, they swing with disadvantage. They have negative modifiers to attack rolls, and obviously all of their saving throws are made with some penalties and disadvantages, because, you know, by inflicting debilitating effects, they are less and less likely to hit you, to harm you, right? It's got also a nice array of battlefield control capabilities to get out of harm's way completely. In many cases, that means usually some kind of teleport, or you know, pushing, pulling, or changing the positioning and the general conditions on the battlefield. It works decently throughout higher tier 2, so I'd say from level 8 is where you kind of start getting into the meat of this build. And entire tier 3 and 4 character progression, obviously, and interestingly enough, it is capable of considerable on-demand damage, because you do have smites for such a heavily defense-oriented build. So, how do we actually do this? Before we go too deep into it, basically it's got a bunch of key features and spells. In terms of point buy, I would do 2 types. So, basically for up to level 8 to 11, I would completely avoid Paladin. So the only thing that I would keep is Hexblade and Bard. So in that case, it would be more like you don't need any strength, because Paladin, you know, if you're not multiclassing into or out of Paladin, you don't need strength. So definitely this is more fitting for a lower level character, while the level 20, the capstone, the character that goes, you know, into higher double-digit levels, I would definitely go something along these lines. You can definitely put 10 wisdom and 10 intelligence. I don't think that's a bad call. I just like maximizing the stuff that I deem necessary, and wisdom saving throws are pretty prevalent in the game, so this is pretty much how I would do it. In both cases, your constitution is 15. Why? Because we are gonna be taking resilient feat, one of which is gonna be responsible for many of these spells listed over here working. You know, a lot of these spells are actually concentration spells, so you need Warcaster and Lucky Feats, Warcaster and Resilient Feats for this build to work optimally, right? In terms of race, I picked Warforged because obviously it's got the highest AC of all races of pretty much every character in the game. The Warforged Resilience and the Integrated Protection, all these other traits are pretty useful. Specialized design and integrated tool, particularly because you can have proficiency and sort of like an expertise, because you double your proficiency bonus for that particular integrated tool. So meaning that if you get your hand on some like poison that poisons the creatures, poison condition inflicts disadvantage. So that's yet another way to do it. We don't really have to rely entirely on spells and features. We can also rely on tools to do this. Just like get the most amount of juice from everything available for you to use. In terms of feats, I mean, pretty much straightforward. You have Resilient and Warcaster, which serve to maximize your odds of passing perception, concentration, constitution saves. And Lucky Feat is there to just like be a general layer of protection against failing saving throws, you know, and maybe a monster attacking you. Even with disadvantage, you know, maybe the monster has a big modifier, you kind of figure it out, and you know, like you just give that dice to the monster. So yeah, it's pretty much good all around. I like personally using it for saving throws, but you can use it for whatever you want. Channel Divinity, particularly Conquering Presence from Paladin, from the Conquest Paladin, is important because it inflicts frightened condition to everybody, all creatures of your choice who fail a wisdom saving throw and that are within 30 feet of you. I think this is pretty nuts, because if you are dealing with crowds, this is gonna be quite effective at basically debuffing a considerable amount of them. Aura of Protection is kind of self-explanatory, plus you add your Charisma modifier to all of your saving throws. In this case, you are not gonna be able to maximize your Charisma. I don't think Charisma of 18 or 20 is that much of a difference. I would pretty much always pick Lucky over maximizing Charisma, if I'm honest, if I just want to maximize my odds of not getting affected, or at least affected to the least extent. Bardic Inspiration and Font Inspiration, obviously they work to funnel, to propel your Blade Flourish feature, which primarily defensive flourish and to some extent mobile flourish. Because these two features, these two flourishes, first one increases your AC, sometimes considerably, and mobile flourish enables you to push the creature away from you, meaning that once the creature is no longer next to you, you can move back, you know, and due to the fact you have higher movement speed, this is pretty a nice package of features that you can use. One level of Hexblade gives you Hexblade Expanded Spell List, Hex Warrior. Both of these features are important. Hex Warrior particularly when you are playing a lower level character, because you don't have Paladin for heavy armor proficiency, so medium armor is gonna be good. You don't have to wait 3 levels to get it with Bard. You can just get it right away at level 1 with your Hexblade. Extra attack or Thirsting Blade Invocation pretty much like depends on your character level, because extra attack is obtainable both from Bard College of Swords at level 6 and Paladin level 5. In whatever way you get the ability to swing twice, to attack twice using your attack action, doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is that we have 2 attacks per attack action. Eldritch Invocations, Devil's Sight. I mean, look, it's pretty much like straightforward with these invocations. You are gonna be, you know, optimizing around your deficiencies, so you need Dark Vision, obviously. You would need Improved Pact Weapon as well to increase your chance to hit, as well have a little bit easier time casting spells, and obviously Eldritch Smite is there to further increase your damage, because sometimes you do need to kill something before it hurts you, right? And in terms of spells, I mean, the list is pretty extensive here. As you can see from it, it's pretty much like there's a little bit of everything, a little bit of temporary hit points, increasing your AC, giving the enemy negative modifiers, penalties to attack rolls and saving throws, disadvantaging, you know, giving enemy disadvantage on pretty much everything and everything possible, while at the same time, you know, minimizing odds of getting hurt through either spells like good old Mirror Image or, you know, Blink and stuff like that. Obviously counter-spelling enemy spells which are trying to hurt you or affect you in one way or another. And yeah, that's pretty much the basic idea behind the build. The details are quite extensive. I'm gonna go into them after this first segment, after this short build breakdown and overview. But if you liked the video so far, this is pretty much it for you more experienced players who just kind of want to, you know, use my videos as springboard for your own character ideas. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button. You know the YouTube drill, you know how it goes. This is pretty much, if you do just one of those things on top of watching my video, you're gonna do more than, I don't know, giving me everything in the world. So yeah, that's pretty much the thing that helped the channel so far, and with a little bit of your help, it can continue growing in the future. With that said, I would like to start dissecting this build one part at a time. So let's go back to Warforged as a race. I mean, in terms of ability scores, constitution, every character needs some constitution, obviously, and choosing any 2 unique +1s does give you quite a bit of flexibility in terms of which ability to increase and which ability to go for based on the level of the character that you're either starting at or finishing at, or you know you're gonna be finishing at, right? So yeah, like, it's pretty flexible. All 4 choices are legit, because depends on the level, right? You would go for decks at lower levels because you can't really afford multi-classing into 3 classes. That's just way too much on low levels. But on higher levels, multi-classing from Paladin into Hexblade and then into Bard isn't that really uncommon, to be honest, especially with Hexblade synergizing with all charisma races in the game. So yeah, I would definitely do it that way in terms of the ability scores. Warforged Resilience is, you know, one of the most potent racial traits in the game, in my opinion, other than probably the armor class, the integrated protection. Resistance to poison damage, advantage on saves against poison condition, immunity to disease right away, requires 0 food, water, air, and sleep to survive, and is immune to magic sleep, meaning that there's like right away at level 1, when you just like by just being a Warforged as a race, you have all of these boons, which is pretty nuts. You also don't really have to sleep, I mean obviously as it's visible from the resilience. However, you do need kind of like a long rest, because if you don't, you are not gonna get your slots back and all the other abilities that recharge on long rest. However, you are fully aware of what's going on, making it harder for anybody to ambush you and the rest of the party. Integrated protection is the primary reason that I went into this particular race, because obviously, I mean, higher AC means it's harder to hit you. It's the only race, class, or anything in the game that scales with which like whose AC scales off of proficiency bonus, resulting in the highest AC calculation currently in the game without magic items. Also, no, without magic items and even spells. You know, this is just by virtue of being a Warforged. Also, no strength requirement to have the an equivalent of plate mail at level 1. 20 AC with shield in offhand. That means that, for example, if you go into any other class and want to have the heavy armor, into any other race, you would have to put your strength into 15 in order to wear plate mail. In this case, you don't really have to do it, because the only thing required for you benefiting from 16 plus proficiency bonus is the heavy armor proficiency, which you get with Paladin. But more on that later. So that's pretty neat. Languages, I mean, only common, but you're not really interested. You're not really a sage anyway, so why do you care? Specialized design is interesting because you pick one skill. I would either go for acrobatics or athletics, depending on whether you dump your dex or strength. Either works to improve your grapple escapes. Grapple condition is pretty common in the game. So yeah, you do need one of those skills. One tool proficiency, and I would pick Poisoner's Kit. It's DM dependent, but if you do get better poisons in this way, meaning that the DM is using some of those Dungeon Master's Guide and Xanatar's rules on the crafting poisons, you might get one of these, and some of these poisons actually inflict poison conditions, such as this one, you know. So depending on the circumstance, this might actually be quite good, because poison condition means that the enemy has disadvantage on all attacks. Let me just open it real quick so that you know so that we kind of like on the same page. So yeah, there we go. The creature has disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. That's pretty neat, because ability checks are made for grappling, and attack rolls are obviously made for giving you damage and affecting you like in additional ways. So you definitely want to maximize your toolset for inflicting disadvantage on attacks, ability checks, and all the other things. One language you get, which is pretty much any language that you want. I don't really care about this thing. So the last thing that you do get is integrated tool, and you pretty much take Poisoner's Kit, because you can't really, you know, you have to dump some of your ability scores, and it's better to have double proficiency anyway. So no other tool to take other than Poisoner's Kit, right? So that's about it for that. In terms of the background, which I probably forgot to open right now, but I am gonna do it real quick. So Gambler, there we go. I think Gambler is pretty much like thematically and mechanically quite kind of a fit for this type of character. Even though it's acquisitions incorporated, meaning that there's a little bit of a meme quality to it, as is like most things from acquisitions incorporated. It is still a mechanically sound choice in my opinion, because a lot of the build's defensive features work off of improving odds of not getting hit and hurt. You're not really denying the enemy the ability. Oftentimes you are even doing that, but sometimes you just have to rely on luck. So this background blends the mechanics and theme almost perfectly. If you ask me, you can like just like take it word for word and just like run with it. So yeah, that's it for the background. Nothing really much. I mean, you do get 2 skills, but I mean, whatever. You know, you get skills anyway. So why do you care? In terms of feats, obviously, you would have your good old Resilient, which is already been mentioned in the beginning of the video. You pretty much put it into Constitution, so it makes a nice 16 Constitution in both cases, improving your hit points, and also obviously giving you a proficiency bonus on Constitution saves, which is important because we do want to pass as many Constitution concentration saving throws which are made using a con saving throw. What is gonna help us with that is Warcaster feat, which is always a good combo with Resilient because advantage on Constitution saving throws for maintaining concentration, easier casting of spells, and obviously casting spells as reaction attacks on opportunity. All of these 3 things are gonna be useful for this character. Primarily we are interested in Constitution saving throws, as are more casters, most of the casters, but the other 3 perks are gonna be, you know, you're gonna definitely enjoy and be able to use them. Finally, Lucky, which is like the most generic feat in the game. Oftentimes I love it, oftentimes I hate it, because it's so universally applicable to almost any build in the game and any character. Multi-class builds often end up with 1 less ability score increase, in this case 4, but you know, and this one is no exception. So taking this feat means you definitely won't be able to max out your charisma. However, most PCs, most characters that I played so far, well, not most, like all, you know, all PCs, you know, in my experience, let's add that, right? In my experience, there we go. Don't really roll more than 20 to 40 times per adventuring day, and even that sometimes, like you only roll like once or twice. And at least a third of those rolls are low importance ability checks, like perception checks, you know, survival checks and stuff like that. Something that you use like as, you know, getting through the motions type of checks. So statistical disadvantage of having -1 to your main ability score, which is gonna affect your accuracy and all the other things that go off of your charisma, is gonna be statistically relevant, but it's gonna get outweighed by the low sample swingy randomness on 1d20 rolls on any given day. One day you can be amazing at everything, the other day you can be absolutely sucky at the same things, you know. So it's pretty much like my experience playing the game more and more that maximizing stats in exchange for not taking lucky feat is in most cases a bad trade, you know, because it's just the way it works, you know. Low sample rolls, like 20-30 rolls at most during the adventuring day, if there's a combat encounter, is pretty much something where lucky feat comes into play way more often than the 5% better odds of doing whatever by increasing your ability score up to max number. In terms of Paladin, I mean, Conquest Paladin is pretty straightforward. I would, for a level 20 character, recommend you that you start in a Paladin. You get all armor, shields, weapons, wisdom and charisma saves, 2 skills, which I would definitely, even if you take acrobatics, I would still take athletics, so at least you can have both of them. Persuasion, intimidation, either works. I think intimidation is better. But I personally like it's better themed because Conquest Paladins are frightening and they even have some mechanical things for intimidation. But I personally always like persuasion more on my characters. I find it easier to use and succeed with. So that just might be my style of playing my charisma characters. But if you like scaring NPCs and monsters into obedience, intimidation might be another way. Divine Sense, I mean, detects creatures, whatever, it's not really that important for you. Lay on Hands, I mean, some healing is always good as an action, especially if it doesn't waste your slots. Fighting Style, unfortunately, defense doesn't synergize with the Warforged integrated protection trait. Now, there is a link here, let me just open it real quick so that I can actually show you. So Keith Baker, or whatever his name is, the guy who made Warforged setting some years ago, actually was asked whether integrated protection works with, you know, it had something, yeah, so there we go. Fighters, defense, fighting style, unclear on if armor, yeah, there we go. So, you know, he says the intent is for you to kind of be considered to be wearing an armor. However, mechanically, integrated protection doesn't synergize with defense fighting style, so we have to pick something else here, and in that case, dueling is the only one that makes sense, the best sense, but we can pick that from Bard. So to avoid overlap between the two classes, protection is the only logical leftover option, because you're not going to be swinging your great weapon in pretty much ever, just because you want to be carrying a shield in one hand to further increase your armor class. So definitely only protection is the one left over, and somewhat still relevant and thematic, because even though you cannot protect yourself, sometimes you do want to protect even your allies. So and that's again another way to impose disadvantage on attack rolls, which is something that you definitely want to do with this type of character. In terms of spell casting, I mean, paladins are half casters who prepare spells, and you know, they can use holy symbols, and they are charisma based. I mean, it's pretty straightforward with paladins. Divine Smite, not that important for this character, because we are going primarily for defensive countermeasures and capabilities. However, when you do hit with the weapon, you can spend slots to increase your damage. So if you want to do so, you are always able to do it, you know, just as good as any paladin multiclass build. In terms of divine health, you are already immune to disease as a Warforged, but you know, unfortunately you cannot avoid all overlaps and redundancies, so it is what it is. In terms of both spells, I would say that Armor of Agathis is good because increases your hit points and passive damage, so kind of makes sense with the theme. The enemy has to do more damage to drop you down to 0. Command can stop a charging enemy. Hold Person can definitely paralyze the hostile humanoid, which is a decently low level even for a paladin, and sometimes you are fighting humanoids, and the best way to you know, stop them from hurting you is to just like paralyze them, and then they can do pretty much anything. Spiritual Weapon will help you keep your damage output decently high using your bonus section, even if you don't decide to use Divine Smite pretty much ever, just so that you can conserve your slots for all of your beautiful, wonderful defensive spells. Channel Divinity is pretty much very good in this, and relevant in this case. Again, inflicting the frightened condition imposes disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls as long as you are in the line of sight of your targets, and they can't move closer to you. So if you frighten them while they're approaching you, you've just succeeded at doing the only thing that this build wants to do, is to not get even touched. So that means affected, harmed, affected by some condition, damaged, you know, whatever. And for just a cheap investment of 3 levels into Paladin, and this being a short rest mechanic, as is any Channel Divinity, it's pretty much almost, you know, like, it's always good, but for this character, again, just one more tool in the arsenal. 1 ability score increase at level 4, pretty standard. At level 5, extra attack, we can swing twice, that's always good. Aura of Protection, when you get it, it's gonna be +3, but at the end of your character progression, it is gonna be +4. However, I did list +5, just in case you decide not to take Lucky for whatever reason, or one of these two feats. I would say you do need these two. Lucky you can sort of live without, but it's so good for, you know, just like giving you a little bit more chance of passing the saving throws, therefore getting half damage or not affected at all. So I would really only keep this character at a +4, meaning that your charisma caps at 18. In either case, all of these 3 numbers significantly improve your odds of succeeding on any saving throws, which is what this build definitely needs at higher levels. And then we go to Swords College Bard, which is gonna give you a bit more stuff after you multiclass into it, as does every bard that you multiclass into. So you do get one more skill and an instrument. Anything works here pretty much. I mean, you at this point you pretty much have almost everything, but if you don't have perception, always take perception, right? Bardic Inspiration is a short rest mechanic, which starting from level 5, when you get Font of Inspiration, so let's just quickly scroll down below, becomes a short rest mechanic that is absolutely needed to improve your AC and positioning. More on that later, really quickly. So spellcasting, you are a class, so bards are a class that learns spells, they don't prepare them. However, they can cast some of them ritually, at least ones that have ritual tag. That means that they don't have to spend slots, they can just, you know, do it for a little bit more time investment. They are full casters, charisma based, and you are gonna cap out at 5th level spells because you are gonna be investing 9 levels in Bard. Jack of all trades is always good for spells like Dispel Magic and Counterspell. That's pretty much been established at this point. And particularly Counterspell in your case is gonna be important because by counterspelling enemy spells, you are completely denying them opportunity of doing anything to you, right? So you just cancel that spell. Song of Rest, a bit more short rest healing is always nice. Nobody goes through the game unscathed, not even this character, so you will get hurt eventually. However, you are gonna be decently like harder to hit and affect in various ways, especially after you get to higher levels. So yeah, I mean, however, you know, a little bit of short rest never hurt anybody. Expertise, 2 double proficient skills on 3rd level, so I would definitely take acrobatics. Not sure why I didn't close the parentheses, but I'm gonna do it now. And any other skill pretty much. Yeah, so let me just put any other, there we go. College of Swords Bard. At level 3 you get your college and you get your proficiencies. You can use any weapon you're proficient with as a spellcasting focus for Bard spells. So even if you, for example, don't take the Warcaster feat, you will be able to cast spells with no free hand, most of your spells at the very least, because now combining the Bard and the Hexblade, which I'm gonna talk later, you're gonna have 2 ways to cast spells without requiring a specific like standalone spellcasting focus. You are gonna be able to use your weapons, and this thing is actually might not be relevant if your DM doesn't pay attention to these things, but it's definitely relevant if he or she does. Fighting style, as I said before, for Paladin, if you pick dueling for Paladin, then the only leftover thing here is 2-weapon fighting, which is kind of shit. So you do take dueling with Bard at some point as a triple class character, which is gonna increase your damage. It's not gonna be that important, but it is something that's just like a slight buff to your offensive capabilities. It's not gonna hurt. It's pretty much the only thing that you have left, so why not? Blade Flourish, attack action, temporarily increases your move speed, and on hit improves your defensive stance. Defensive Flourish is your bread and butter, especially after you hit level 5. This is gonna be randomly increasing the number that's written in your AC field, meaning however much you or little roll on the Bardic Inspiration die, that's how much your AC increases until the start of your next turn. This is pretty straightforward, easy to understand. However, that's not the only thing that you can do with this feature. Mobile Flourish comes to mind as well, because you can push the enemies or other targets away from yourself, giving you a little bit more head start, which you can further stack with the temporarily increased movement speed if you take the attack action. So with your 30 movement speed as a base and then 40 using the attack action by being a Swords College Bard, you are able to effectively create quite a bit of distance between you and your enemy, which sometimes is better than relying on luck for the enemy not to roll a critical hit and therefore completely ignore your stupidly overpoweredly high armor class. The feature does work with ranged weapon attacks as well, so keep that in mind. And this definitely further increases your untouchable combat status, because ranged weapons and ranged kind of combat in general is the less lethal option, just like period. That's kind of self-evident, with some monsters having only melee attacks, meaning that you can kind of like get a couple more attacks on them before they can get the first one on you. However, I mean, with Divine Smite and everything else, even Eldritch Smite, you are kind of stuck with melee. You don't have to go for it, but you definitely, if you want to maximize all of your features and use them optimally, you do kind of have to engage in a little bit more deadly melee type of combat. You know, so sure, okay, so you get 2 ability score increases at level 4 and 8. It's pretty standard. Extra attack at level 6 does overlap with Paladin, so this is pretty much completely unimportant for you, a dead level in that regard, other than learning a spell. Counter Charm is mechanically inferior and often hated. However, this feature can be used in a sort of thematic, you know, your charms don't work on me either, fool, you know, like that type of way. So, you know, you have a way of, you know, just like not getting affected by these things, you know, if you know that you're affected. So yeah, that's pretty good in my book, and that pretty much goes with the theme of this build, that you don't really want to get affected. Then we go to the Hexblade, pretty much like standard 5 levels in Warlock. Why 5? We do want the we want the 3rd level Warlock spells. Blink is pretty nuts. You do get a couple more slots. 2 short rest 3rd level slots. Yeah. So that's definitely gonna be quite good for you. Hex Warrior, I mean, you use your charisma instead of strength for all weapon attacks, and also you get medium armor proficiency, which right away at level 1, if you are playing a lower level character and you know that you're not gonna get anywhere close to level 20, is pretty nuts. Immediately increases your AC quite extensively, so I think that's good. Hexblade's Curse, not so much, because you don't really care about damage. However, a bit of extra healing for when you inevitably do lose some hit points is gonna help you just like a tiny little bit more. And then we go back to Eldritch Invocations, which I already kind of mentioned before. Devil's Sight, I mean, it's pretty much kind of a dark vision anyways, so it's pretty self-explanatory. You can see normally in darkness, magical or non-magical. Improved Pact Weapon is, you know, it provides increased accuracy and smoother spellcasting components. So again, if you decide not to go for the Warcaster feat, but instead take only the lucky and resilient feats to maximize your charisma, which is somewhat reasonable and you can still pull it off. However, again, I would pretty much almost always go for the advantage on all of my damage forced triggered constitution concentration saves. However, this does improve accuracy, smooths out your spell components. Agonizing Blast, if you decide to use Eldritch Blast cantrip, does increase your range damage. However, if you don't want the generic Warlock Eldritch Blast spam feel, which I personally, the more I play, the more I kind of... I'm not against it, but I usually try to play my Warlocks without Eldritch Blast. That's almost impossible in a lot of cases, but in this particular case you can definitely, you know, manage without it. I would advise you in that case to pick up Eldritch Smite, because this is gonna increase your damage, but on top of increasing your damage, it's also gonna be proning some huge or smaller creatures. So that's also another way of inflicting disadvantage on their attack rolls. Increase your damage output and disadvantage on attacks capabilities on enemy attacks. Yeah, so you know, Thirsting Blade comes to mind as well, because if you can't get your Bard up to level 6 and there's not enough levels for 5 levels of Paladin, I would say that Thirsting Blade definitely also makes sense, because it is basically extra attack, just differently worded, differently flavored. You are limited to your packed weapons, but that's not gonna be that much of a problem, because you are gonna after all take Pact of the Blade boon, because you do need it in order to take these invocations. And as we all know, Pact of the Blade does give you quite a bit more flexibility in terms of the weapons that you can kind of like, you know, create and use. So that's pretty good. At level 4, obviously, you get your ability score increase, and at level 5, you get nothing but 3rd level spells and slots, right? So, you know, after all of this has been said and done, what are these spells? Let's just talk a little bit about some of these spells. The spell selection will differ primarily based on the end tier this character concept finishes at, and to some extent depends on the spell selection of other casters in your party. Below is a list of spells for a largely self-reliant character, so meaning that you can pull most of the stuff that you want to do on your own, you don't need outside help. Red font generally signifies must take or thematically fitting spells. However, as always, consult with your DM and other players to see whether you need to modify your spell selection. That goes even as far as completely deleting some of these red spells, even though I would tell you never ever ever go without a shield if you can learn it or prepare it. So, yeah, that's gonna be it for spells. In terms of cantrips, no cantrips are really that important other than some theme. So let's just quickly order them like this neatly. Actually, yeah, let me do this. So Booming Blade would definitely make sense because it synergizes with your Warcaster. And you can just like do some damage that way. However, that's not gonna be, you know, that much impactful in terms of your defensive capabilities, because more damage is just more damage, right? Green Flame Blade is another way to marginally increase your damage per round instead of just like swinging 2 times with your longsword. If you have 2 adjacent enemies, Green Flame Blade does actually inflict more damage to 2 of them combined than the extra attack would inflict to 1 or 2 characters, you know, separately. So after all, you know, the third cantrip that I would personally go is actually Chill Touch. I like this cantrip more because it does actually give disadvantage on attack rolls against undead enemies. So there is one more very specific, but is a way of inflicting disadvantage. And obviously, if they can now not only not hit you, they can now not heal or regenerate as well, because, you know, if they get hit, they can't regain hit points until the start of your next turn. I think this pretty much goes better with the theme in my opinion, and I would pick this over Eldritch Blast. However, that said, you are not gonna go bad, you know, you're not gonna be wrong with Eldritch Blast. I just think this one makes more sense. In terms of bards, I mean, Standard, Vicious Mockery, Minor Illusion, and Blade Ward is somewhat important in my opinion, because it does sort of go with the theme, you know, especially at lower levels, or if you just get into so precarious position that you're completely out of slots and all the other features that you use to fight enemies. In that case, this cantrip alone can half the damage, or even negate, even more mitigate damage than, you know, usually. It does have to be non-magic damage, or actually it doesn't, yeah, it has to be weapon attacks, so it cannot be spell attacks, but a lot of creatures do have weapon attacks, so yeah, this actually works amazingly well, especially when you get surrounded from all sides. Some attacks will definitely squeeze through the defenses just based on the big numbers, a lot of rolls. Some of them are going to be crits, but none will hurt as much because you are going to be halving that damage, mitigating as much of it as possible. In terms of level 1, I mean, shield, what else, you know, +5 to AC as a reaction. Paladin, it's gonna be Bane primarily because -1d4 to attack rolls and saves is low-key bananas, because, you know, it's just, you do want both of those things, you know. You do want to affect negatively, you know, you do want to affect the creature's attack rolls and saving throws negatively in whatever way, shape, or form, because lowering its accuracy and increasing its percentage and, you know, odds of failing future saving throws is always a good thing. This is a first level spell, you have a lot of slots, so this is gonna be something that you're probably gonna be relying on a lot during your character progression. Armor of Agathis, you do get for free from your Conquest Paladin at level 3. It's pretty much like good temporary hit point spell that deals some AoE, deals some melee some of that damage back in terms of cold damage. It goes with the theme, doesn't really protect you that much, but it's always good to have a little bit of a temporary hit points buffer, just in case, you know, you do need to rely on every bit of hit point that you can muster. In terms of these other spells, protection from evil and good is always good against, you know, fiends, fae, I don't know, even celestials, if you're fighting angels for some reason, aberrations and all of that. For a level 1 spell that only costs basically 25 gold, because 25 gold is the amount of cost to make this or buy this, it's pretty nuts. And Shield of Faith is another way that you can increase your AC. It is concentration, but at lower levels, especially as a paladin, you are not gonna be actually even having shield spells, so this is one of the ways that you can increase your AC at least until you don't lose concentration. Wrathful Smite and all of these other first level spells, you can, like, this one is prepared for free, so you're perfectly fine with it. Wrathful Smite does make thematic sense because you inflict Frightened Condition, and then Frightened Condition, as we all know, inflicts disadvantage on attack rolls. And you know, you can always go in and say, go on, try and hit me now, I dare you, I double dare you, mother effer, you know. So yeah, it's definitely makes sense, although you can definitely survive without it. In terms of Bard, level 1 spell, Stasha's Hideous Laughter is the only one that's really, really important for the level 20 build, because you can get all the other Bard spells kind of for free anyway. Maybe you don't really need Dissonant Whispers, even though Dissonant Whispers is a very good control spell because it can deal damage and move the creature away from you, but I personally don't think you really need it. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is gonna be more than enough, and it's gonna last longer than just one round. For a level 1 spell, this is one of the best, just like debilitating debuffing spells in the game. Featherfall, obviously, you know, you might never need to use this spell during a campaign, but it's amazing if you and your party get pushed off of a cliff, airship, air castle, or any other space where you are falling down more than 200 feet into the depth. So yeah, Featherfall is gonna just like be a reaction that gives temporary, kind of a pseudo flying speed to you and your allies. In terms of level 2 spells, Blur and Mirror Image combo is back again in question. I mean, this combo has been tried and tested many times on my other characters as well. Blur is just a generic disadvantage on attack rolls to everybody who relies on sight. And, you know, obviously creatures that can see through illusions, they don't get affected. But at lower levels, this is gonna be pretty nuts. So yeah, it's gonna be something that you're gonna be able to rely on even at very high levels. So yeah, it's always potent. Misty Step, a low investment, a second level spell, short range teleport that uses your bonus action, and you can get away from grapples and hard hitting monsters while yelling, come and get me now, bitch, you know. So it's always good. Paladins get hold person for free. Conquest Paladins, I mean, it's paralyzed, so paralyzed creatures can't really do much or anything to you. Spiritual Weapon increases your damage, but it's not up to a theme, so you get it for free, but you don't really have to use it. It's on you. In terms of these other spells, these are my recommendations. None of them are absolutely necessary, but since you can prepare a decent amount of spells as a paladin, these are the ones that I would personally go for, because, you know, they provide utility, they provide support, and that's often something that goes much longer than, you know, increasing your AC or damage. At level 2, bards get blindness deafness, which is one of the better debuffing spells for inflicting disadvantage on attack rolls. Yet again, I mean, if creatures don't rely on sight, they can still like sense you through tremor sense, I don't know, blind sight, but it is still a cheap countermeasure against creatures that even have like true sight, because true sight is still a sight, so if they can see, they can really use it. Yeah, so what am I talking about? This is actually a pretty good spell, and on top of that, it is not a concentration, so that is definitely something that is worth mentioning. And other spell that I would mention from a second, like other second level paladin spell, Bard spell, is Calm Emotions, because technically it only works on humanoids, so it's kind of whatever. But if you are playing in a humanoid heavy campaign, this is the spell that you're definitely gonna be probably relying the most, because you can make the target indifferent about creatures of your choice that it is hostile toward. Let's say you're fighting a bunch, like you're fighting you're trying to suppress emotions of a group of people in a 20-foot radius sphere. You know, it's just a bunch of humanoids trying to fight your allies, and you just like calm their emotions so they don't attack you anymore. They are no longer hostile. Talk about the ultimate way of not getting touched, you know, just like completely make the enemy forget about even, you know, like not even think about it. So yeah, at level 3 you get the Blink, which is present on the Hexblade's list of spells. This spell is like one of the most nut spells in the game. It is very swingy. It is kind of like a coin toss, but you definitely can get hurt if you temporarily hop into another dimension, plane, or existence, or you can if the DM decides to be a little bit of a, I'm not gonna say asshole, but definitely, I mean, if he wants to challenge and make it more believable. Ethereal plane is not a desolate place. There are creatures even in ethereal plane. So maybe you just randomly get affected by some creature which is native to that plane, you know, so who knows. In most cases, it's just like mechanically you are not present in the material plane. The monster can't even like attack you because you're no longer there. So you just completely are out of harm's way in every way, shape or form. Counter spell is pretty straightforward and understandable because, you know, you counter any spell that you're absolutely sure or decently sure is gonna affect you negatively, and also synergizes with Bard's Jack of all trades, which adds half proficiency to all of your ability checks. That does include the ability check using your spellcasting ability, because that is one of the ability checks, you know, so that's how it works. In terms of Bard spells, I would go with Dispel Magic and Non-Detection. Neither of these are really necessary, you can live without them, but why would you ever go without Dispel if you can learn it? And Non-Detection is definitely the type of spell that prohibits the type of, you know, a lot of troubles or damages or death and suffering and, you know, blood, guts and tears, because if they can't find you, they can harm you, right? So you remain, you keep your untouchable status. At level 4, bards get compulsion, which I think is probably the best overall spell at level 4 bard spell that bards can learn. I mean, bards can learn any spell, but only at level 10, or lords at level 6, right? Every enemy within 30 feet of you, every single enemy, hundreds of them potentially, moves away from you. Okay, sure, if they are immune to charm, then they don't, but in most cases, when you're fighting a mob, when you're fighting a big-ass crowd, not all of them are gonna be charmed, you know. Most DMs don't really drop like 100 pieces of the same identical stat block. They kind of change things a little bit. So charm condition immunity is gonna be effective against this spell, but on the other hand, not every monster has charm condition immunity, so it's definitely a very, very nice addition to your list. So yeah, basically that's it. Freedom of movement, paralyzed, restrained, and grapple immunity, sort of immunity, you know. They do have to come paralyzed and restrained from magical sources. So if you just get grappled by somebody, you know, like getting close to you and, you know, wrapping his or her hands around you and then grappling or restraining you that way, that's not gonna be effective with this. This spell is not gonna be able to prevent that. But if you get grappled, you can just spend 5 feet of your movement to automatically escape from non-magical restraints. This particular spell is a specific rule that overrides the general rule that says that your movement speed is 0 when you're grappled. I've triple checked this recently on Sage Advice and other sources, and yeah, you definitely, specifically for freedom of movement, you can use your movement speed to escape from grappled condition. And I mean, grapple is pretty common in the game, and being able to escape it, just like absolutely certainly, as long as you have movement speed, you can escape. That's pretty nuts. Confusion, not necessary, but relatively small AoE is compensated by amazing stack of effects. On a fail, targets immediately lose their reactions. You can just move away from them without provoking attacks of opportunity, and it prevents them from harming you or any other party members almost 80% of the time. So only on 9 and 10 the creature can act and move normally. On all other cases, they kind of get, you know, told what to do, or at least they are confused, so they don't really have a choice. Now, you know, sure, if the monster rolls 7 or 8, it can still technically hit you or your allies, but the odds are still, if there's some enemy next to the monster who's affected by confusion, they can kind of like, if you confuse multiple enemies, they can start hitting each other, so it works wonderfully sometimes, and yeah, things like that happen in the game. So repeat saves are unfortunate recurring pattern for spells like this one. It's pretty standard in 5th edition that all or a large majority of spells do give the targets opportunity to repeat wisdom saving throws or any other saving throw at the end of their turn. Dimension Door is not mandatory, another non-mandatory spell, but just in case a 30 feet teleport using Misty Step is not enough, you now have what, like 300 feet, I think? Yeah, 500 feet. So that's nuts. Yeah, so really, really good. Hold Monster is fighting a single monster villain, big bad evil end guy. Paralysis prevents him or her from harming you and allows your party to murder it before it gets to try again. Sure, it increases your damage by paralyzed condition being, every melee attack is a crit. But it's not the focus of this build. The focus is to like keep the monster or the enemy at bay before it can get to you, touch you, hurt you, affect you in any way, shape, or form. Synaptic Static is a very interesting AoE, which has been a very fine and refreshing addition from Xanatar's Guide to Everything, which is basically like fireball level damage. For a 5th level spell doesn't seem like much, but it is psychic damage. And it's based off of intelligence saving throw. So sure, like once the creature fails, it's not gonna take too much damage for a level 5 spell, but it gets affected in a negative way because it gets inflicted a minus 1d6 debuff penalty to their attack rolls and ability checks for a full minute without concentration. So that makes this spell, in my mind, especially in this particular case, pretty nuts. Okay, sure, the target can pass the saves, repeat saves, but I mean, at least for one turn, it's gonna have minus 1d6 on attack rolls and ability checks, and oftentimes that's all you need. You slap disadvantage on the monster through concentrating on some of your other spells that you have access to, and then cast Synaptic Static on it, so now it has disadvantage and minus 1d6 to hit. That's, and then on top of that, if you inflict the Bane spell, which further adds, subtracts additional minus 1d4 of all of its attack rolls and saves, is, you can have a significant modifier, negative modifier on monsters' attack rolls to the point of monsters not even being able to hit you at all. Even like the only way to hit you is like double nat 20, right? So stuff like that, which is like 0.25% of the time. It's still a decent amount of chance for a lot of rolls, so it does happen sometimes. In terms of progression, if you're playing up to, let's say, level 8, I would go Hexblade 1, Bard 1, and then Hexblade 5. It's pretty straightforward what you get in terms of this progression. I would change it up slightly for a level 1 one-shot build. I would go Hexblade 1, Bard 1, and then Hexblade 5. Bard 6, I would go immediately after that. I would change some of these, like feats and spells and skills to closer resemble the type of character that you can be at each and every level. So this build does require a little bit of a forethought in terms of like, and maybe a little bit even meta knowledge, knowing what's about to transpire in the campaign. It's not necessary for the build to work. It's only necessary if you want to squeeze as much from it as possible. And there's the reason you don't see the level 20, because level 20 has been pretty much described by all of these other spells and features which I've been talking about for the past hour. And yeah, actually that's gonna be about it. I'm also gonna invite you once again to go check out my Patreon page. The option to chuck a buck my way is always there. However, if you are, invested in my channel, if you like my videos, and if you want to get your hands on these nifty little, video scripts or notes, build notes that I make for all of my characters, you can get them. You can download them from my Patreon page if you pledge into the Magical Secrets tier. Again, I do like to stress it out and repeat, it's not mandatory. None of this is mandatory. Like, you don't have to pay me anything. But it's very much welcome, and you do get some perks, and as I release more and more characters, you will have more and more database to choose from. And yeah, that's pretty much gonna be it for that. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell button. You know the YouTube drill, you know how it goes with YouTube. Probably not your first video, so yeah, if you have any questions or need some, you know, something for me to clarify in more detail, let me know in the comments down below. And yeah, with that said, Minmax Munchking out, and talk to you soon.